the truth is that God has invited you to join him in the work
Mhm.
he is doing. But he is not like he wants you to be a part of his work, but his work will continue.
Yes.
So the grace for us is sometimes I can get confused and say, "Well, God, if I don't, then who?" And God's like, "Yeah, I'm not worried about that. Like, I invited you to join me because I know it will be the richer for you. I know it will be the blessing for you. I know it will be incredible for you, and I love you. So I'm inviting you in. But yeah, I'm not worried."
Welcome to Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. I'm Kristen Fields Chadwick, your podcast coach on this transformative podcasting journey. Our mission: empower Kingdom entrepreneurs to confidently launch and grow podcasts, fostering a journey of being seen, being heard, being known, and making a lasting kingdom impact. This is Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. Your voice matters. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. I am Kristen Chadwick, your host today, and I am so blessed to have one of our dear, almost OG podcasting management clients with me today. And I cannot wait to introduce her. First of all, welcome to the show, Bethany Kimsey.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yay. I am so glad you're here because yeah, I could keep going and going on how wonderful you are and what a gift you are, but I do want to share to the world who you are. So Bethany is a mama of many children. She has 8 kiddos plus 2 through
Yeah.
marriage, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And married to Troy, her fun husband, who, man, it's just been fun to get to know him personally. And oh man, gosh, you do so much. I would describe you as this matriarch for warrior mamas today. And will forever root for you and be someone to champion you in your message, in your voice, in your own podcast, in your writing, in what you create in your journals and pillows and all of these things that we're going to talk about today. But she does have her own podcast. Like I said, she is part of our amazing dream team of podcasters that we get to help. And her podcast is phenomenal. And I would love for her to share about it. So, would you like to introduce your own podcast?
The name of my podcast is the Warrior Mama Podcast, and it is designed to speak to the mom who needs to connect the gospel, the what God says about her actually into her everyday world.
Mm,
I think that for most of us, we believe those things, and yet it's really hard to see how they intersect practically. So, the
mhm,
goal of our podcast is that we want to see a mom not only go, "Yes, I believe these theological statements. God
mm,
loves me. God loves my child. He's for us." But actually see those in play in real life moments with their child, whether it's a little one and you're teaching self-control, or it's maybe even with a teenager, you're teaching self-control. Maybe we're always talking about that
right.
one. But like actually like how does it play out? Like how do we have these gospel conversations in real life? So that's really my whole heartbeat of this, because if we can do that, if we understand that intersection, then we begin to walk with confidence with
Mm,
God in our motherhood. And anxiety flows away, and the worries and the doubts and all the discouragement. And also, honestly, all the let me measure myself and compare myself to every other mom around me. And
mhm.
instead, we kind of get this framework and we go, okay, this is what I'm walking in. And if I walk here, I can walk confidently and know and have vision for what's coming. So that's the
Yeah.
goal.
And the goal is clear. And when you listen to Bethany's podcast, you can hear her heart, her purpose, her why. And you can hear that same confidence in her of this is how she's showing up and how she's called to speak this message to other mamas and to walk in that confidence. It's so powerful. Okay, so first, go pause this episode and go subscribe to her podcast.
Yeah.
So, permission, pause, hold on, go do that, then come back, and I want you to listen to the rest of this episode because we're gonna walk through what made you want to start a podcast, because there was a specific moment, and I remember this conversation very vividly. I remember where I was standing listening to your story of when you called me and you said, "I think I wanna start a podcast." I would love for you to share what happened when you made this decision to start a podcast, and if you want me to re-jog your memory, I can.
Refresh my memory.
So, you called me and you were asking what did it look like to start a podcast, and you said, "I woke up in the middle of the night and I felt
Mhm,
very clearly." Oh, do
mhm.
you remember now?
Yeah. I
Okay.
felt very clearly that God had said, "This is what you're going to be doing." And it really, I mean, my who I am, it didn't make sense
Mm,
logically. Like, I'm not in at the time that I called you, I was not in the avenue of even speaking publicly, of doing anything more than what God had already told me to do, which was I did a lot in like, on the back porch of my in my house with women, where we would just
mm,
gather and we would talk about these things and run the framework of our life through the word. And yet God really did. He woke me up in the middle of the night and he just was said, "This is what we're gonna start talking about." And then he gave me a name. And so my podcast had the name, "When God Breaks Through" for a while. That
mm.
was the starting name for this podcast was, "This is how we're gonna start this, Bethany. This is how you're gonna step into it." And, and in essence, now go figure it out. It's what I
Yes.
felt like was very clear for me. Yeah, that was I it's funny because when you get into it, it has moved now where I know that I'm supposed to be doing this. So that's a good refresher for me, Kristen, because sometimes I'm like, "Lord, are you still wanting me to do this?" Because we all get discouraged,
Yes. Yeah.
and God keeps affirming through his word and
Mhm.
through his scripture.
Yes. So, we will talk about discouragement and rebranding in a little bit, but first I wanna say and ask, when you started, did you have fear in that of starting a podcast? Or were you more like, "Okay, and I don't know necessarily how to go about that." And what kinda shifted in those beginning maybe in that first year for you of when you started?
I think I think I felt just out of my depth. I
Mm,
don't know if fear is exactly the right word for me
okay.
because it had been so clear that God had said, "Do this." And for me in my faith walk, there are specific spaces where the Lord has, in essence, said, "You need to do this." And he makes it so clear that to do anything else is disobedient. And so
Mm,
there was no negotiations at that point. Like we were going to step in and do this. So then it was just, I feel really out of my depth. So I need to figure out how to do this. And
mm,
in that space, I did struggle with wanting, so for the first probably 6 or 8 episodes even, I did it the way I had people around me who were doing podcasts that I knew, and so I was doing it like what they did. And I
mhm,
have this distinct memory, somebody called me and he said, "Can I give you some advice?" And I was like,
mm.
"Yeah, yeah, like, I'll take
Yeah,
any advice from
please.
anybody. I don't know what I'm doing." And he said, "Stop." For me, he said, "I can tell when you're reading your words and when you're just speaking." And he goes, "And you are a podcaster who should just speak."
Mm,
And it was great for me. So I was working with a couple other girls at the time, and that was not the advice this same person was giving them. So I knew it was genuine for me. Wasn't
mhm,
his methodology actually for his own personal stuff.
mhm,
And it kind of for me was when I stopped relying on having scripted everything out. So if you go back and you listen to my very first about 6 or 7 episodes, And then you hear me later on, you're like, "Oh, yeah, now she's just talking," And that's just how my podcast is. I think it's wonderful if you have a scripted podcast. I think those are really there's nothing saying one is better than the other. It just was
Yeah.
for me, for who
Mhm.
I was, and part of being a podcast host is that the people on the other end listening, they are joining you. They're
Mhm.
they're coming alongside of you, and so probably being true to who you are is the best. So that was probably the best first piece of advice that helps me to kind of stand up on my own and say, okay, then I'm just gonna do it the way I
Mm.
feel like it will work best for me, and I don't
Yeah.
need to follow what maybe everybody else does.
Yeah. And that is so important, is figuring out your rhythm, your way of doing things that really align with who God has created you to be. And it really understanding your own identity and your way may not match up with what the experts quote unquote say, or even what the people that are closest in line with us in the ministry or in business are doing. It may not be exactly like they are doing it, and that's okay. So diving a little bit deeper on that, is you hit on a point of staying true to who you are, and I think that's really key for a lot of new podcasters where, yes, it's okay to follow a certain strategy or somebody else's 7-step plan of doing that. How would you suggest, because you've been doing this, is this 3.5 years now?
Mhm.
How have you stayed true to who you are and really leaning into developing your own voice as a podcaster?
Well, I think so. I have like it's sitting right in front of me. So I typically podcast from right here. And sitting right in front of me on this, there's a board in front of me. And it says the scripture that says, write the vision and what does it say? 'Cause I always say it says, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so he may run who reads it. And it's from Habakkuk. And I've that scripture for me has been this place where God's like, when I sit here and I plan out and I map out, the vision has to align with exactly who I believe I'm talking to and why I'm talking to them. So
Hmm.
if it can't align there, and I have that up on that board too of exactly who I'm talking to,
Mhm.
and who she is, and where she is in life. So if it doesn't, I really try and stay tight to that. And I'm constantly asking myself the question of, does this give her a voice of truth for today? Like,
Mm.
will this give her hope? Will this be a place where she goes, oh, I can just rest here in this truth that was spoken? And if it's yes, then then that then it works. That kind of has helped me frame out what I'm going to talk about or where
Mm.
I'm going to go. The other thing for me that keeps me like learning my voice and understanding how I'm doing this is I stay in active ministry with moms.
Mm.
I don't I stay where I am, hearing where they are and understanding their struggles and listening to their heartbeats and finding out
Mm.
you know what's going on. And in doing that, it kind of informs as well and says, Bethany, if there's all these moms inside of your local area that are wrestling with this point, it's probably everywhere.
Yeah. So good, and such a good reminder to keep our boots on the ground. We can't, as podcasters who are stepping up to the mic as a leader, you are a leader. If you step up to the mic, you are a leader. But the importance of being in community, in in the places where our ideal listener, our ideal person that God has called us to speak to, that we
Mm.
are staying connected in the real world. Not only, I love that you said it helps us to stay connected to the heartbeat. And so beautiful. And I think of so many people that are listening, especially that are coaches and ministry leaders. Don't forget to stay get connected in your local community because they need you. They need you and you need them. I mean, it's both and of we need each other. So, okay,
Mhm.
so talking about community, since you just went there in the local community, how with the online community have you developed a community for your podcast to get connected to women all over the world? How have you developed that through your podcast?
Well, I mean, I have the beginnings. We've been starting, it's called the Warrior Motherhood Community, and it is beginning to start in this past year of helping moms connect with one another and begin to work on a deeper level what we talk about on the podcast. So on the reality of the podcast is the podcast gives you a taste of
Mhm.
what you can dive deeply into and walk with confidence in. You're not going to, just like if we only limit our growth with the Lord to what we learn on a Sunday morning, we're going to end up stunted.
Mm.
In the same way, if you only limit what you learn about like a faith walk in motherhood to, for instance, my podcast or any other podcast, like it's just not going to happen
Mhm.
because you have to have that accountability, the conversations, the community that begin to push those ideas into the actual framework of when you get up and it's 9 o'clock in the morning. And now this actually comes to play right here.
Mhm. Mhm.
And how do we do that? So I think that that's one thing that we're working on this year with the Warrior Mama whole concept is helping moms communicate and connect with one another.
Mhm.
Now, some of the things that we've done with that is we've done some different more live things and different study things that, for instance, I have this precious little course, this Bible study that women that comes out of the podcast. You can hear a lot of the same teachings in the podcast, but if you dive deep in it, you should go into the reset course. But my whole desire is for you to do that in community with your friends, not
Mm.
do it by yourself. I mean, the
Yeah.
reality is, I do think that podcasting only gives you a top layer of what it means to walk with other people well. And we have to walk with other people well in
Mhm.
life. And so, in everything else that we do, we really try and say, hey, you got to get in community. You've got
Mhm.
to find your people and you've got to learn with your people.
Yeah, so, so good. Ah, oh, I okay. So I did say that we were gonna talk about when you feel discouraged as a podcaster.
Yeah.
And I know as I have, as many other podcasters have, we have all walked through seasons of, I just don't know if I can do this anymore. And I know that you have walked through some of those
Yeah.
seasons too.
Yes.
What what do you think helped you in that time of wanting to give up or wanting to take a break? What was the shift for you?
Well, I think my first thing is find the person who is going to cheer you on and who's going to run alongside of you and kind of carry you if you feel
Mm,
like you're not going to make it. So, y'all do that. My husband definitely does that,
yeah.
where there's many times where I have kind of sat at the kitchen table and gone, I mean, is this like what? And his voice now or his speech, he just literally it's just one line. He now just he goes, be the voice.
Mm.
Just be the voice a mom needs. That's all
Ooh.
you need to do. If you're being the voice a mom needs, just keep doing that. And so there's many times we need our cheerleaders because on the day where it's hard and you're like, I have got to create this episode. And every time I start it, I can't get my words to come right, or I can't get this thought to just mesh right together the way I see it. And that's my process. So my process is I'll have a concept, and then as I work in the word and I'm pushing it together, I can hear it, but a lot of times it won't come out right. And I'm like, I
Mhm.
can't get it to come out. And and it's that languaging from a cheerleader going, just be the voice. That there's a part of me that just has to pause for a minute and go, God, I mean, just Just today, just help me be the voice mom needs. So I think that those are 2 things. I think another thing that I have learned is to be gracious to yourself. So there's nothing wrong with saying, I am I'm dry. Like
Mhm,
I'm discouraged or I feel empty, like I have nothing to offer.
mhm,
And be gracious to yourself in that and give yourself that space with the Lord and just in quiet just to get refreshed because
mhm,
podcasting is a creative sport. So if you're not inputting, there will come a time where it gets dry if you're not,
mhm,
feeding your own well, so to speak.
mhm.
So,
Yeah, that's good. I so much there that you just said. I think I wanna do a whole episode on the words of Troy, of "Be the voice your client needs,"
yeah.
because that is powerful. It literally gave me chills. That is so powerful, and it reminds me of one of my favorite scenes that has always spoken to me in Wonder Woman, when you've probably heard me talk about it, Bethany, where she puts on her crown and steps out into no man's land and takes the bullets on behalf of the other people so that they can advance forward, and that's what I picture with you, Bethany, of, like, sometimes we just have to put on the crown and step up out of the bunker onto the field and go full force so that the other moms behind you can go forward and take back territory. It's just such a powerful image to me, and as I can
Mhm.
picture that for you and your podcast and continuing to move forward. And I love that you brought up just grace, having grace with yourself. And if you are a podcaster that is feeling dry or tired, that there are options for you to creatively move forward and continue to be that voice and not have to keep cranking out content. So, what were some of those things during those season that you did on a podcast side other than helping take a break, go on vacation, get fed spiritually, emotionally, that you did in the podcasting world so that you could keep moving forward?
Well, I think that is where those seasons were that we've definitely done it the last 2 end of the years. That's about when I'm tapping out, and so we usually do, like, my top shows of the year. We've done
Yeah.
that the last couple of years, and that has helped me immensely just to be able to step to the side and enjoy, for instance, the holiday season with my kids. The other thing that I have done and I wanna say something also to the give yourself grace before I share this, I think. And again, this was something that my husband has spoken into me about this, is to remember, especially if you believe that this is something that God has called you to. So you are holding this in a space where you're trying to be faithful to something, and that can feel weighty, and it
Mm,
can feel an obligation, and it can feel like, it just can feel weighty. And the truth is that God has invited you to join him in the work
mhm.
he is doing. But he is not like he wants you to be a part of his work, but his work will continue.
Yes.
So the grace for us is sometimes I can get confused and say, "Well, God, if I don't, then who?" And God's like, "Yeah, I'm not worried about that." Like, I've invited you to join me because I know it will be the richer for you. I know it will be the blessing for you. I know it will be incredible for you, and I love you. So I'm inviting you in. But yeah, I'm not worried. Like,
Mhm,
I'm going and I'm inviting you in. And like understanding that lifts the weight of obligation. It's no longer a performance, it's a joining in.
mhm,
So therefore, some other things that I've done that have helped with that is really going back and saying, "God, what would bring me the most joy for the next season?" Like, and
mm,
so you can watch in my podcast, you can kinda see I will do some more serious things that are work for me to do, and then it's all of a sudden it's gonna be easy, like, lighter, more joyful, or more like a little bit different. You can see the ebbs and flows
Mhm.
of when it was for me, God going, "We're gonna talk about this because you wrestle with this." So then it's,
Mhm.
like, hard, it's like plowing ground. And then it's for me to get more joy in it, it's, "Okay, so what is just something simple that is," and again, we hear this all the time. What is obvious to you is often genius for someone else. So you can
Mm.
see in my podcast where there's places where all of a sudden I'm like, hey, we're just going to talk about this. And
Mhm.
it's just stuff that to me has always just been, and it's easy, but it's life giving to someone else. So you
Yeah.
can, and that gives great, I think, rest in the
Mhm.
going too, is
That's
pacing
good.
yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. Pacing yourself. Yep. And rhythms of intensity and not and
Yeah.
yeah, I can see how that is helpful. And actually, as I'm thinking about different podcasters, that is I think that's just the way the Lord's waves of lighthearted, okay, let's go deep. Lighthearted, let's go deep. Yeah, so consistent there. One more thing of the rebranding, I wanna hit on that because you started out with a podcast called When God Breaks Through, shifted
Mhm.
into the Warrior Mama podcast. What made you shift from that, from the first title to the second title?
Well, I think a lot of conversations with the Lord, because at
Mm,
first I really didn't wanna shift, because I was like, "That's what God gave me." Like, that's what
mhm.
he told me. Like, I gotta be, like, true to what he said. And yet, as I began to work, and I was in these last 3.5, 4 years, just really working on a lot of active ministry and different, like, fingers of this ministry now that kinda spread out, really understanding that God does break through, but he breaks through where the gospel is applied, and he grants confidence, and he grants the ability to stand firm in a
Mm,
battle to a woman. And, if I could be so bold as to say, like, my biggest passion is I believe that motherhood is under attack
mm,
like nothing else because it's one of the last bastions where the gospel is held up for the next generation. It just
mm,
is. And
mhm,
so we've got to figure out a way to create a forum for women to be equipped in that, where I think in a lot of ways we're not really equipped. We
mhm,
hear a lot, but we can't connect it. So beginning that conversation with you and understanding that when God breaks through doesn't have any keywords that talk about motherhood. It doesn't have
mm,
any indicator that, hey, my whole conversation with you is about when God breaks through in your motherhood.
mm,
So we did need to make a shift so that some mom looking for something about motherhood could find it. And so, beginning to shift that podcast's name, we did it in steps, didn't we? We said, when God breaks
mhm,
through,
mhm.
tagline, Warrior Mama
Mama.
podcast.
Yeah.
And then we moved that front and
Mhm.
and took off the when God breaks through.
Yes. Yeah, and I think it was a great move because it really does focus in on who you really are serving, and so if you're listening and curious about your podcast name, I encourage you to really again, it's about serving your listeners, so what are they going to type in to the podcast search bar? What are they looking for in their specific need and pain point right now? So, okay, one last question, Bethany is what advice would you give to a brand new podcaster, a first year podcaster? What in that time frame, what would you if they were sitting right in front of you, what would you give their what would your piece of advice be for them in that season?
I think my first piece of advice is just like number one, do it, and number two, relax. You
Mm,
know, to trust that there's going to be a process of growth for you, just like there's a process of growth in your audience. Like you're going to change and you're going to settle in and you're going to begin to stand strong. It's kind of like the analogy of I would never scold my 10-month-old who is standing with a very wide base of support. It's the first time they've ever stood alone, and where are their hands? Their hands are like way up high, and they're just like, I mean, they're gripping everything with every part of their being just to stand upright. And when you're new at anything, that really is your posture. Don't apologize for it. Just understand that as you go, your hands will start to go down. You'll start to get in a rhythm, and your arms will start moving appropriately with your legs, and things will start, and you'll move forward.
Mm,
And that is, I mean, I fell a lot my first year and stumbled, and, and yet I don't stumble as much now, 3 years in. I still stumble, I still get tripped up. I still don't know, but it changes. And I think giving yourself the understanding that nobody expects somebody to be perfect. I mean,
mm.
it would be wrong for me to scold my 10-month-old for standing that way. Anybody would look at me and go, "You're the worst parent ever," right? In fact,
Right.
we're not even gonna scold a 2, 3, or 4-year-old for tripping and fall. Nobody gets scolded for tripping and falling. When
Yes.
does that ever happen? But somehow in our brain, we really scold ourselves.
Mhm.
And so learning, "Oh, this is part of it, and
Mhm.
it's gonna be okay."
Yeah.
And then really keeping front and center, who am I talking to? What do they need?
Mhm.
What do they need is key, I think. It will keep you in your lane, you
Mhm.
know? There's lots of things I would love to talk about, but I
Yeah.
keep inside, try and stay in the lane.
Yes. Oh, oh, man. So, so beautiful, and you are such a delight, and I love that we have gotten to know each other over the last 3.5 years, and looking forward to watching you continue to run your race and staying in your lane and being the voice that is needed. You guys, please go check out Bethany's podcast, the Warrior Mama podcast. It is uh, such a grace-filled, empowering podcast to get you connected into the root of the gospel. So, thank
Mm.
you so much for joining us today. And I hope you're encouraged as a podcaster. And if you have any questions about podcasting, you guys don't hesitate to reach out. Be sure to download my free 3-module starting a podcast guide. It is so fun to be able to release that to you guys and check that out. All right. Thank you guys. Thanks, Bethany.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening today. Hey, I want you to know that there is an opportunity for you and I to connect. I would love to do that. Find a link below and we can schedule a one-on-one free 15-minute consultation. I want to hear, where are you in your podcasting journey, and how can I help serve you and help you bring that kingdom impact dream into reality?